The worst mistake I ever made wasn't running that night. It was believing I could disappear. The rain turned Manhattan into a blur of gold lights and black shadows as I pulled my hood lower and crossed Lexington Avenue, with shaking hands stuffed deep into my coat pockets. My sneakers splashed through freezing water collecting near the sidewalk while taxis hissed past me in streaks of yellow light. 2:13 a.m. Every normal person in the city was asleep. But fear doesn't care what time it is. Fear keeps you moving even when your legs ache and your lungs burn and your heartbeat sounds too loud in your own ears. I kept walking. Fast. Don't look back, Claire. Don't look back. The words repeated inside my head like a prayer. Because if I looked back and saw them again, I knew I would panic. And panic gets people caught. My phone buzzed violently in my pocket for the 9th time in 20 minutes. I didn't need to check the screen to know it was Ethan. He'd been calling nonstop since I slipped out of the apartment while he was downstairs arguing with someone in the parking garage. The memory of his voice still wrapped around my throat like ice. You think you can ignore me? I shoved the thought away and walked faster, my shoulders slamming accidentally into strangers under umbrellas who barely noticed me. New York taught people not to look too closely at anyone, especially not women trying to disappear. Thunder rolled across the sky as rain soaked through my jeans. I turned sharply into a side street lined with luxury hotels and expensive black SUVs waiting under glowing awnings. The kind of places I usually walked past quickly because one night inside probably cost more than my rent in Queens. Another buzz from my phone. Then another. Then a text lit up my lock screen. I can still see you. My stomach dropped so hard I nearly stopped breathing. I turned instinctively and caught sight of 2 men crossing the street half a block behind me. Dark jackets. Baseball caps, walking too fast, looking directly at me. My chest tightened instantly. Maybe they weren't his friends. Maybe I was imagining it. But fear doesn't wait for proof. Fear runs first and thinks later. I cut across the street against the light, nearly getting clipped by a black Escalade whose horn echoed through the rain. Sorry, I shouted automatically before hurrying toward the nearest building with bright lights and security standing outside. The Ashford Grand Hotel rose above me like something out of another world. Marble columns, golden chandeliers glowing through 30-foot glass windows. Men in tailored suits moving in silence. For one stupid second, I hesitated under the awning, dripping rainwater onto polished stone floors while a valet looked at me like I didn't belong there. He was right. I didn't. But when I glanced back toward the street and saw those same 2 figures slowing near the corner, survival made the decision for me. I stepped inside. Warm air wrapped around me instantly, carrying the scent of expensive cologne and fresh flowers. Piano music floated softly through the lobby while wealthy guests laughed beside a fireplace bigger than my entire apartment. Nobody looked scared here. Nobody looked hunted. I lowered my head and walked quickly toward the elevators, praying I could disappear into the crowd long enough to breathe again. I didn't know that somewhere above me, in a dark penthouse office overlooking the city, a man named Adrian Moretti had already noticed me on the security cameras. And once Adrian Moretti noticed something, he never looked away. The elevator doors slid shut behind me with a soft metallic sound that felt louder than thunder. I leaned against the mirrored wall and finally let myself breathe for the first time in almost an hour. My hands would not stop shaking. Rainwater dripped from the edge of my coat onto the polished black floor, while soft piano music echoed faintly from the lobby below. I pressed the button for a random floor without even looking. I just needed a place to think. A place to hide for 5 minutes until those men outside disappeared. The elevator began to rise smoothly, floor numbers glowing one after another above the door. 12, 14, 16. Then suddenly the lights flickered hard. Once, twice. The entire elevator jerked beneath my feet so violently I grabbed the rail beside me to keep from falling. No, 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 I whispered as the overhead lights died completely. Darkness swallowed the small space instantly except for the dim red glow of the emergency panel. My pulse slammed painfully against my ribs. Of course this would happen tonight. Of course. I hit the emergency button twice. Nothing. Just static. Rain hammered faintly somewhere outside the building while the elevator sat frozen between floors. My breathing turned uneven as old panic crept into my chest. Tight. Sharp. Familiar. I squeezed my eyes shut, and forced myself to count slowly. 1, 2, 3. But then I heard something outside the elevator. Footsteps. Slow. Measured. Not hotel staff rushing to fix a problem. These steps sounded calm. Controlled. Like whoever walked toward me already owned everything around him. A shadow moved beneath the narrow crack between the doors. Then silence. Complete silence. The kind that makes your skin prickle because you know someone is standing there listening to you breathe. A second later, the elevator hummed softly back to life. The lights returned one by one overhead. Before I could even react, the doors slid open halfway. And there he was. Tall. Broad shoulders beneath a perfectly tailored black suit. Dark hair swept back neatly despite the storm outside. He stood with one hand in his pocket like he had nowhere else to be at 2:30 in the morning except directly in front of me. The warm golden hallway light behind him cast sharp shadows across his face, making his expression impossible to fully read. But his eyes were clear, cold, focused entirely on me. I knew instantly this was not a man people ignored. "Are you hurt?" he asked quietly. His voice carried the faint roughness of someone used to giving orders without repeating them. I opened my mouth and realized I did not know what to say, because men who looked like him did not notice women like me. Not unless there was a reason. "I am fine," I answered too quickly. His gaze dropped briefly to my sleeve, where dried blood still stained the fabric near my wrist. Then back to my face. "That says otherwise." My throat tightened. Up close, he smelled faintly of cedarwood and expensive cologne mixed with rain. Everything about him felt calm on the surface. But beneath that calm sat something heavier. Dangerous in the way deep water is dangerous. Silent until it pulls you under. "The elevator stopped," I said awkwardly. I noticed. One corner of his mouth moved slightly, not quite a smile. Somewhere farther down the hallway, another man appeared briefly in a dark suit before stopping the second he saw us. He lowered his eyes immediately. Respect. Fear. Maybe both. The man in front of me never looked away from my face. "You came in through the east entrance 7 minutes ago," he said softly. "You checked behind you 3 times before crossing the lobby." My stomach dropped. "How do you know that?" "Because this is my hotel." The words settled heavily between us. Suddenly the marble floors, the silent security, the expensive black SUVs outside, all made sense. I had not hidden inside a safe place tonight. I had walked directly into someone else's kingdom. And judging by the way he looked at me now, Adrian Moretti already knew I did not belong there. My fingers tightened around the strap of my bag as I stepped out of the elevator beside Adrian Moretti. The hallway outside felt impossibly quiet, thick carpet swallowing every sound except the distant rumble of thunder beyond the windows. Somewhere below us, Manhattan kept moving. Taxis, sirens, people hurrying through the rain. But up here, everything felt separated from the rest of the world, like the top floor of the hotel existed under different rules. Adrian walked beside me without rushing, one hand still resting casually in his pocket, while 2 men in dark suits lingered near the far end of the hallway pretending not to watch us. Pretending badly. I could feel their eyes following every step I took. "You do not need to look so terrified," Adrian said quietly. "I am not going to hurt you." I almost laughed at that. Not because it sounded comforting, because it sounded practiced. Like something dangerous people learned how to say well. "You own this place?" I asked carefully, among other things. His answer told me absolutely nothing and somehow everything at the same time. We stopped in front of a pair of black double doors guarded by another man wearing an earpiece beneath his collar. He stepped aside instantly the moment Adrian approached. No hesitation, no questions, just immediate obedience. The doors opened silently into the largest hotel suite I had ever seen in my life. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked rain-soaked Manhattan in streaks of silver and gold light. A fire burned softly across the room beneath a massive marble wall, while jazz played low somewhere in the background. Expensive, elegant, cold. It did not feel lived in. It felt controlled, like every object inside had been placed exactly where someone wanted it. Adrian loosened the cuff of his watch as he crossed the room. "Sit." The word was calm, not harsh, but still very much in order. I stayed standing. "I should go." He glanced at me briefly while pouring amber liquid into a crystal glass. Outside, his eyes moved toward the storm beyond the windows. "At nearly 3 in the morning? I will take my chances." "No," the single word stopped me cold. Adrian took a slow sip from the glass before setting it aside untouched. The men following you are still outside the hotel. My heartbeat stumbled hard. How do you know they were following me? Because my security team stopped them from entering the lobby 6 minutes ago. Every breath in my chest suddenly felt too small. Who are they? He asked. I looked away instantly. Nobody. Adrian studied me for several long seconds. Silence stretched between us while rain slid down the massive windows behind him. Then he walked closer. Not rushed. Not aggressive. Just deliberate enough to make me painfully aware of the size difference between us. He was tall enough that I had to tilt my head slightly upward to hold his gaze. Nobody does not chase a frightened woman through Midtown in the middle of a storm, he said softly. And nobody does not make her look over her shoulder every 15 seconds. Heat rushed into my face because he was right. He had noticed everything. The shaking hands. The panic. The way I kept checking exits the second I entered a room. Adrian's eyes dropped briefly toward my wrist again, where dried blood stained my sleeve. Did they hurt you? The question caught me off guard. Not because of the words. Because he sounded genuinely angry about the possibility. I swallowed carefully. It was an accident. Claire. Hearing my name from his mouth sent a chill down my spine. I had never told him my name. My expression must have changed because Adrian's voice lowered slightly. You checked into the hotel security system the moment you walked through my doors. Of course I had. Men like him probably knew everything within seconds. I should have been terrified. Maybe I was. But underneath the fear sat something worse. Relief. Because for the first time all night, nobody could reach me here without going through Adrian Moretti first. And judging by the way every man around him moved carefully when he entered a room, that was not something anyone wanted to do. The fire cracked softly across the marble wall while I stood frozen near the center of Adrian Moretti's penthouse, trying to understand how my life had spiraled this far out of control in a single night. Rain streaked down the massive windows behind him, turning the Manhattan skyline into blurred silver lights that looked unreal from this height. Everything inside the suite felt warm, quiet, expensive, but none of it made me relax. Men like Adrian did not build rooms like this by being harmless. He loosened the cufflinks at his wrist slowly, his movements precise and calm while I remained standing near the doorway like a nervous animal ready to bolt. You should sit before you fall over, he said without looking at me. I am not going to faint. One dark eyebrow lifted slightly. You have barely stopped shaking since you arrived. Heat rushed into my face instantly because he was right again. I hated that he noticed everything. Adrian crossed toward the bar near the windows and poured another drink before glancing back at me over the rim of the glass. Tea. The question surprised me enough that I blinked. What? Tea. Coffee. Water. You look cold. I stared at him suspiciously. Do mafia bosses usually offer tea to strangers? For the first time since meeting him, something almost human flickered briefly across his face. Not quite. Amusement. Close enough to make my stomach tighten anyway. Only the ones bleeding on my hotel floors. I looked down automatically at my sleeve again. The small cut near my wrist had stained the fabric darker than I realized. It was not serious, just enough to sting every time I moved my hand. Adrian set his glass aside untouched and walked toward a cabinet near the fireplace. A second later, he returned carrying a small black medical kit. Sit. I said I am fine. And I said sit. The room fell quiet after that. Not loud silence. Heavy silence. The kind that made it obvious he was not used to repeating himself. Slowly, I lowered myself onto the edge of the cream-colored sofa while Adrian crouched in front of me with controlled patience that somehow felt more intimidating than anger would have. Up close, I noticed the faint scar near his jawline and the expensive silver watch beneath the rolled sleeve of his black shirt. Everything about him looked polished, controlled, like chaos was something that happened to other people. Give me your hand. I hesitated only a second before letting him carefully pull my wrist toward him. His touch was warm, steady, nothing like Ethan's ever was. That realization hit me hard enough to make my chest ache unexpectedly. Adrian cleaned the cut in silence while soft jazz drifted through the penthouse speakers. Outside, thunder rolled low across the city. You flinch before I even touch you, he said quietly. My throat tightened immediately. I do not know what you are talking about. His eyes lifted slowly to mine. Dark, calm, impossible to read. Someone taught you to expect pain before kindness. I pulled my hand back instinctively, but Adrian released it immediately instead of holding tighter. That almost made things worse. "You do not know me," I whispered. "No," he agreed softly. "But I know fear when I see it." The words settled painfully between us. Before I could answer, one of the men outside knocked once against the penthouse door. Adrian's entire expression changed instantly. Still calm, still controlled, but colder now. More dangerous somehow. He stood smoothly and crossed the room while I watched him with my heartbeat suddenly climbing again. The man outside lowered his voice respectfully. "Sir, security confirmed the men are still outside. They have been sitting across the street for 20 minutes. Adrian glanced toward the rain-covered windows. "And they are asking questions about the girl." "Girl. Not woman. Not guest. The girl." Adrian stayed silent for several long seconds before answering. "Nobody speaks to her without going through me first." Then he closed the door softly and looked back at me in a way that made my pulse stumble all over again. Because for the first time that night, I realized the storm outside was no longer the thing trapping me there. The rain kept falling against the penthouse windows like fingertips tapping against glass, steady and relentless, while I sat curled into the corner of Adrian Moretti's impossibly expensive sofa, trying to ignore the fact that my entire body still felt tight with adrenaline. Across the room, Adrian loosened the top button of his black shirt and listened quietly as another man spoke to him near the doorway in low Italian I could not understand. Even without knowing the language, I understood the mood instantly. Tense, controlled, dangerous beneath the surface. The other man finally nodded once before disappearing back into the hallway, leaving the penthouse silent again except for the fire and distant thunder outside. Adrian stayed near the doorway for a moment with one hand resting loosely in his pocket, his head lowered slightly, like he was thinking through 10 different things at once. Then his eyes lifted toward me. Calm, focused, too observant. "You should try to sleep for a few hours." I let out a quiet laugh before I could stop myself. "Sleep? Yes. There are men outside looking for me. Not for long." The confidence in his voice should have reassured me. Instead, it made my stomach twist tighter. Because people who sounded that certain usually had the power to back it up. Adrian crossed the room and poured hot water into a porcelain cup before setting it carefully on the table in front of me. Tea. Chamomile, judging by the scent. Such a normal thing in such an abnormal night that for one strange. Second, I almost forgot who he was supposed to be. "Why are you helping me?" I asked quietly. Adrian leaned one shoulder against the marble fireplace, watching me over the flickering light. "You walked into my hotel frightened and bleeding. That does not answer the question. Perhaps I dislike men who chase women through the streets at 2 in the morning." His voice remained smooth and controlled, but something colder moved beneath the words. I wrapped both hands around the warm cup mostly to stop them from shaking again. "You do not even know me." Adrian tilted his head slightly. "That is true. Then why does it feel like you already decided something about me?" Silence stretched between us for several long seconds. Outside, lightning flashed across the skyline, illuminating the sharp angles of his face before darkness settled again. "Because people reveal themselves when they are afraid," he said finally. "Most become selfish, loud, desperate." His eyes stayed locked on mine. "You walked into a building full of strangers and still apologized to the valet for dripping rainwater on the floor." Heat crept into my cheeks instantly because I remembered doing exactly that. Adrian noticed everything. Tiny things. The kind of details most people ignored. "That does not mean anything," I whispered. "It means you are still trying to remain kind while terrified." The words landed somewhere painfully deep inside my chest because nobody had said something gentle to me in a very long time. I looked away quickly before he could see how much that affected me. My phone suddenly buzzed against the glass coffee table hard enough to make me jump. Ethan's name flashed across the screen again, beside 12 missed calls and a stream of unread messages. Adrian's gaze dropped toward the phone instantly. "You should block him," he said quietly. "You make that sound easy." "It is easy." A bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. "Not everyone solves problems by making people disappear, Mr. Moretti." The room went still after that. I realized too late what I had implied. Adrian stared at me for several seconds without blinking. Then slowly, very slowly, the corner of his mouth curved upward into something dangerously close to amusement. "Careful, Claire," he murmured softly. "You are beginning to speak to me like you are not afraid anymore." Before I could answer, Another flash of lightning lit the windows behind him. And for half a second, I saw something in Adrian Moretti's expression that frightened me far more than anger ever could. Interest. The storm finally began to weaken around 4 in the morning, but the tension inside Adrian Moretti's penthouse only seemed to grow heavier with every passing minute. I sat curled beneath a soft gray blanket someone had silently brought me while the fire burned lower across the marble wall. The city outside looked quieter now. Streets slick with rain, headlights moving slowly through puddles 20 stories below. Everything felt distant from up here, safe in the kind of way that did not feel real. Adrian stood near the windows with his phone pressed to his ear, speaking quietly in Italian while the glow from Manhattan reflected against the sharp lines of his face. He had not touched the whiskey sitting beside him once. That surprised me for some reason. Men under pressure usually drank more. Adrian only became calmer, more focused, more unreadable. "No," he said softly into the phone. "Not yet." Silence. Then his jaw tightened slightly. I said no. Even without raising his voice, the room shifted around him. Like power itself had weight. He ended the call and slipped the phone into his pocket before turning toward me again. "You should try to rest. You keep saying that like sleep is possible tonight." Adrian crossed the room slowly. "You are exhausted, Claire." I looked away because he was right. My entire body hurt from tension and adrenaline crashing together all at once. I had not eaten since lunch, had not stopped moving for hours. And now that I was finally still, every emotion I had pushed aside all night threatened to catch up with me at once. Fear, embarrassment, anger, relief. Adrian sat down across from me instead of beside me, leaving enough distance that I did not feel trapped. That detail alone unsettled me more than if he had tried to control the space. "Who is Ethan?" he asked quietly. My stomach tightened instantly. "You read my messages?" Your phone lit up every 30 seconds for an hour. His expression stayed calm. "I can read upside down." Despite myself, I almost smiled. Almost. "He is my ex-boyfriend." Adrian's eyes stayed on me carefully. The kind who does not understand the meaning of the word ex? I let out a soft breath and stared down at my hands. Something like that. Silence settled between us again. Not awkward this time. Just quiet. The kind that made me too aware of how late it was and how strange this entire night had become. Finally, Adrian spoke again. "Did he frighten you before tonight?" The question landed gently. Too gently. My throat tightened immediately because nobody had ever asked it like that before. Not accusing. Not suspicious. Just careful. I shrugged weakly. "Ethan gets angry sometimes." Adrian leaned back slightly, studying me with those impossibly observant dark eyes. "Claire." My pulse stumbled again at the sound of my name in his voice. "Angry men punch walls," he said quietly. "Frightened women memorize exit routes." I stopped breathing for half a second because he was right. Again, every time I entered a room, I checked the doors automatically. Every subway platform, every restaurant, every elevator. Survival had become muscle memory long before tonight. I wrapped the blanket tighter around myself, suddenly feeling exposed in a way I hated. "You make it sound dramatic." Adrian's expression hardened slightly. "No, I make it sound familiar." Before I could respond, another knock sounded softly at the penthouse door. One of Adrian's men stepped inside, holding a tablet before lowering his voice respectfully. "Sir." The men outside finally left. Relief hit me, so suddenly my eyes closed for a second. Gone. They were finally gone. But Adrian did not look relieved at all. He took the tablet, glanced briefly at the screen, and something cold flickered behind his eyes. "What is it?" I asked quietly. Adrian looked at me for a long moment before answering. "They did not leave because they gave up." His voice stayed calm. Too calm. "They left because someone told them exactly where you live." The words hit me so hard my stomach dropped straight through the floor. "What do you mean they know where I live?" Adrian stood near the fire holding the tablet loosely in one hand, while his expression turned colder by the second. Not angry. Worse. Controlled. Carefully controlled. The man beside the door shifted uncomfortably before answering for him. "One of them made a call from outside the hotel about 15 minutes ago." Adrian's eyes never left mine. "To someone already waiting near your apartment building." Every breath in my chest suddenly felt sharp. Too fast. Too small. "No." I shook my head immediately and stood up so quickly the blanket slid onto the floor. "No, my roommate is there." Adrian crossed the room before I even realized he moved. Claire. Mia has no idea what is happening. Panic climbed higher with every word. I grabbed my phone from the table with trembling fingers and called her instantly. Straight to voicemail. My heartbeat slammed painfully against my ribs. I tried again. Nothing. Again. Nothing. Come on, Mia. My voice cracked softly. Adrian watched me in silence for several seconds before speaking. What floor? What? Your apartment. 6th floor. He nodded once toward the man near the door. Send someone there now. The man disappeared immediately without another word. No hesitation. No questions. I stared at Adrian while fear tightened around my throat. You cannot send people to my apartment. One dark eyebrow lifted slightly. Would you prefer I send nobody? I opened my mouth. Closed it again. Because the terrifying part was that I did not know anymore. Adrian stepped closer slowly, careful enough that I noticed the effort. Your roommate will be fine. You do not know that. No, he agreed quietly. But I know panic clouds judgment. And right now you are imagining the worst possible outcome. Tears burned unexpectedly behind my eyes, and I hated it instantly. I hated crying in front of him. Hated looking weak while Adrian Moretti stood there looking like the human version of control itself. I should go home. The second the words left my mouth, Adrian's jaw tightened. Barely noticeable, but noticeable. No, I cannot. Just stay here while people go to my apartment. You will not help your roommate by walking into danger emotionally compromised. I stared at him in disbelief. Emotionally compromised? You are frightened, exhausted, and trying to make decisions from guilt instead of logic. The scary part was that he was right again. I hated how quickly he saw through me. Adrian glanced toward the windows where dawn had begun bleeding faint gray light across the skyline. You have been surviving on adrenaline for hours, he said more quietly now. At some point your body will stop cooperating. You talk like this happens to people around you often. Silence. Adrian looked away briefly toward the city below before answering. Fear is predictable. Something about the way he said it made my chest tighten unexpectedly. Like fear was not just something he recognized in others. Maybe something he understood personally. My phone buzzed suddenly in my hand hard enough to make me jump. Ethan. Another message. I know where you are now. A cold wave rolled straight through me. Adrian noticed the change in my face instantly. What did he say? I hesitated only a second before handing him the phone. Adrian read the message once. Then very slowly, his entire expression changed. The room itself seemed colder somehow. He handed the phone back carefully. Too carefully. You are not leaving this penthouse today. You cannot decide that. Adrian's eyes locked onto mine with terrifying calm. Claire. His voice dropped lower. Softer. The man threatening you made the mistake of believing you are alone. Silence swallowed the room after that. Heavy, breathless silence. Then Adrian stepped closer until I could smell cedar wood and coffee lingering faintly on his shirt. You are under my protection now, he said quietly. And people who threaten what belongs inside my walls rarely make the same mistake twice. Morning arrived slowly through the storm clouds, pale gray lights spilling across Adrian Moretti's penthouse, while Manhattan woke beneath us in streaks of wet pavement and honking traffic. I had not slept at all. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan's message glowing against my phone. Screen. I know where you are now. Across the room, Adrian stood near the windows in a fresh black dress shirt, one hand resting loosely in his pocket while he read something on his phone with the same calm expression he wore for everything. I still had not figured out how someone could look so controlled all the time. Even silence seemed to obey him. My nerves did not. You have been staring at the same cup of coffee for 20 minutes, Adrian said without looking up. Because I am trying to decide whether this entire night is real. That finally pulled his attention toward me. And I wrapped both hands around the warm mug. I still cannot tell. Something unreadable flickered briefly in his eyes before a knock sounded at the penthouse door. One of Adrian's men stepped inside. Tall, dark suit, earpiece beneath his collar. Every person around Adrian looked like they had been trained never to waste movement. Sir, the man said quietly, your guest roommate is safe. Our people arrived before the others made contact. Relief hit me, so suddenly I nearly dropped the coffee cup. Mia is okay? The man nodded once. She has been escorted to another location temporarily. My shoulders sagged with exhaustion so hard it almost hurt. Adrian noticed immediately. Of course he did. Thank you, I whispered quietly. The man glanced briefly toward Adrian before leaving the room without another word. I stared at Adrian across the penthouse. You moved my roommate? I protected her. Without asking me. Would you have said yes? I opened my mouth. Closed it again. Because honestly, probably not. And that terrified me. Adrian crossed the room slowly before sitting opposite me near the fire. Morning light softened the sharp edges of his face slightly, but not enough to make him look less dangerous. Nothing could do that. You are angry, he observed calmly. I do not like people making decisions for me. No, he agreed softly. You only like carrying impossible situations alone. I looked away immediately, because somehow that hurt more than it should have. Adrian leaned back slightly, studying me in silence. You know, he said after a moment, most people spend their entire lives trying to be noticed. His gaze stayed steady on mine. You spend yours trying to disappear. My throat tightened unexpectedly. Sometimes disappearing feels safer. Does it? The question landed softly between us. Not mocking. Not cold. Genuine. I looked down into my coffee instead of answering. Because the truth was I did not know anymore. Hiding had not protected me. Staying quiet had not protected me. Being careful had only made my world smaller and smaller until fear became normal. Adrian's phone buzzed suddenly against the glass table beside him. His eyes dropped briefly to the screen. Then the entire room shifted. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But I felt it instantly. Like the air itself tightened. Adrian stood smoothly. What happened? I asked quietly. He slipped the phone back into his pocket before answering. The men outside last night were not working alone. My stomach dropped again. Adrian walked toward the windows overlooking Manhattan while his reflection darkened against the rain-streaked glass. Someone paid them to find you. Why would anyone do that? Silence. Adrian turned slowly toward me, his expression colder now than I had seen it all night. That, he said quietly, is exactly what I intend to find out. Then another knock echoed through the penthouse doors. This time sharper. More urgent. One of his men stepped inside with tension written all over his face. Sir, he said carefully, there is someone downstairs insisting she knows Claire Bennett personally. My pulse stumbled instantly. Who? The man hesitated before answering. A woman named Evelyn Carter. My blood turned cold because Evelyn Carter was Ethan's older sister. And she hated me almost as much as he did. The moment I heard Evelyn Carter's name, every bit of warmth inside Adrian Moretti's penthouse disappeared. My fingers tightened instinctively around the coffee mug, while panic rushed back into my chest so fast, it almost made me dizzy. Across the room, Adrian noticed immediately. Of course he did. He noticed everything. You know her, he said quietly. It was not a question. I swallowed hard and nodded once. She is Ethan's sister. The man near the door shifted uncomfortably. She insists she needs to speak with Miss Bennett immediately. Adrian's expression did not change at all. And how exactly did she make it past hotel security? She used your name, sir. Silence settled across the penthouse instantly. Heavy silence. Dangerous silence. Adrian glanced once toward the windows overlooking Manhattan before speaking again. Bring her upstairs. My head snapped toward him. What? I would like to hear what she has to say. Adrian, no. His eyes shifted toward me slowly. Calm. Steady. You are frightened. Because she should not know I am here. Exactly. That single word made my stomach tighten harder. Adrian turned back toward the man near the door. 5 minutes. No weapons. No phones. Yes, sir. The moment the door closed again, I stood up too quickly from the sofa. This is a bad idea. Adrian watched me carefully. Probably. Then why are you doing it? He walked toward me slowly, hands relaxed at his sides while morning light spilled across the black fabric of his shirt. Because frightened people make mistakes, he said softly. And I would like to know who made one first. Ethan or his sister? I stared at him in disbelief. You really think everyone works like some kind of business strategy? No. Adrian stopped close enough that I could smell coffee and cedarwood again. I think desperate people become predictable. My heartbeat stumbled painfully because somehow he always spoke like he understood far more than he admitted. Before I could answer, the penthouse doors opened again. Evelyn Carter stepped inside wearing a cream-colored coat still damp from the storm outside. Her blonde hair looked perfectly styled despite the rain, but her eyes widened instantly the second she saw Adrian standing beside me. Fear. Real fear. I had never seen Evelyn afraid of anyone before. Claire, she breathed sharply. Thank God. I did not move closer. How did you find me? Evelyn's gaze flickered nervously toward Adrian before returning to me. Ethan has been losing his mind all night. He thinks you stole something from him. My stomach dropped. What? I do not know exactly what it is, she said quickly. But men have been coming to the apartment asking questions since midnight. Adrian stayed silent beside me, but I could feel the shift in the room immediately. Like every word mattered now. Evelyn took another careful step forward. Claire, you need to leave New York for a while. Why? She hesitated. Too long. Adrian noticed too. Because Ethan owes people money, she admitted finally. A lot of money. My blood ran cold. What does that have to do with me? Evelyn looked down briefly before answering. He told them you knew where something important was hidden. Confusion crashed into panic so fast I almost laughed. I have no idea what you were talking about. I know. Evelyn's voice cracked softly. But Ethan thinks you do. Silence swallowed the room after that. Adrian's expression remained unreadable.